All right. So, are you ready to accumulate all your knowledge and challenge yourself? Because that's what we're about to do in the setting up data with the before each challenge. What I want you to do is add a new describe block, some tests, and even a nested before each for our new property we've added here, full name. So, full name is a getter that takes the middle name and sees if it exists. And if it does, it's simply going to concatenate it and return the first name, middle initial, last name. So in my case, Dylan Christopher Israel, it would be Dylan C. Israel. And if there is no middle name, it's going to simply return Dylan Israel. That's what we're going to test. So jump back over to main.js, give it a shot, see if you can do it. If not, no worries. Were you able to? Hopefully. If not, no worries. Practice makes perfect. I'm about to do it right now. So whenever you have these methods, these properties, where especially when you're testing multiple things, you have to think, is there a describe block that already exists that would work with it? Default values wouldn't really work, right? This is simply a describe block, a grouping block that's there for the default state of our model class. But we can go ahead and create a new one here. We'll call it full name. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about test-driven development later on, but oftentimes when I am writing my code, I'll write the test cases before I actually write the code. And we'll do something like similarly right now, where we're going to write our first two tests. So we know we're going to have two tests, one to test when there's a middle initial and one to test when there's not. So what would a good name be here? So let's say full name, and we'll say something like middle initial when middle name is defined with first and last. And then we'll have another test here. We'll copy this over, put it down below, and there we go. See, indent these nicely. Indenting is very important to me. So instead of middle initial, we'll say when no middle name, return just first and last. Well, so we have our two tests. And you'll see if we save it, that it's not going to blow up, but we will get has no expectations. So keep in mind that this obviously isn't a very good test if it doesn't assert anything. You know, you want, as my mother said, keep your expectations low so you won't be disappointed. Do not do that with your testing. The expectations are crucial and important. So keep that in mind. So now that we've done that, let's actually go and write our before each before we write our test here. We're making the assumption our model class will always have a last name and a first name. Let's go ahead and get rid of that question mark. We know what we're doing. We have no questions. And in here, in our before each, we're going to actually overwrite our model class from earlier. So we're going to set this equal to a new user, except we're going to give it a first name and a last name. So let's say first name, Dylan. And we'll say last name, Israel. All right, so now that we've done that, we've set up our model. Now, as we go, we're going to still follow the same arrange act assert pattern. So in our arrange here for this first test, we'll go ahead and we will set the middle initial. So we'll take our model and we'll say dot middle name. We'll set this equal to Christopher. The pattern I follow when I want to pull a value out is to simply call it a result. So if I have a getter, or in this case, just a property, I'll use a result and I'll set this equal to our model.fullName. And then our assert here, we'll do an expect, and then we'll say expect our result to be. There's a couple ways that you can go about this. We could simply type this out, Dylan C. Israel, like so, and that'd be right, and you could see that it passes. Now, my preference, if it's something simplistic, such as the concatenation of strings like so, what we're actually expecting is that the full name to be a concatenation of the first name and last name. And we can do this with some backticks like so. And instead of Dylan, we can use our our model dot first name. And then we can do the same thing here. Model dot last name. And then here, this would be the model.middle name 0 index. And it's still going to pass and everything works. It really depends on the complexity of your test. This is just some string concatenating, so we don't have to worry too much about that. So that's our one test. Our second test here, when middle name is not returned, we'll have our arrange here. Now, you might be thinking like, hey, do we need an arrange? There's no middle name already. You want to be expressive in your test. You really want to arrange the data to go and showcase the state of your test where it's at. In our case, even though it's sort of expressly defined in our before each, or indirectly rather, we want to be expressive here. So we'll say model rather dot middle name. We'll set it equal to an empty string. Then we'll do our act again. We'll have our const result is equal to model dot full name. Now we'll do our assertion, and we expect the result dot to be, and then we'll go ahead and do something like so. Same thing we did earlier. Model dot name space model dot last name. And bam! Now we have two additional tests that test that full name property. We grouped it. We also had a before each that's going to override and provide these assumed values, this default state that we wanted. And we not only talked about having sort of a standard for when we are storing data, but also a way of writing our test and perhaps a better way of actually testing what it is we're looking for rather than writing a hard coded value.